and I am glad to have the opportunity to come and speak in this conference. All right. So today I will be speaking on ChatGPT. I know we are all aware of everyone is talking about ChatGPT. So we will deep dive into the algorithm that goes behind the ChatGPT, and more precisely, we will be talking about its application in the finance industry and how we can implement it. What are the advantages and threats now that everyone is talking about generative AI? And how would you implement it in the industry? What are the regulations and what are the things that we need to look out for while implementing it? Okay, so before jumping in to the architecture of ChatGPT, we will first discuss some of the limitations of the previous transformer-based architectures. Now, machine learning models can be highly accurate in optimizing the objective function, but can fail in alignment. So what do I mean by alignment? So the large language models are capable of generating very fluent human-like text, but the output many a times differ from the expectations or suffer from hallucination. By hallucination, I mean it may be like repetitive text or incorrect facts. Now, why does it happen? This comes from the difference between the way the models are trained and the way we want to use them. So let's go over some of the examples. What are the core techniques for training the transformer? The first one is very popular, which is the next token prediction. Given a sequence, so the models are trained to estimate the likelihood of the next possible word. So basically, it tells like a girl is reading, she can read a book or she can read a newspaper. Both are equally likely. Now comes the second technique, which is a masked language modeling. It actually learns the statistical structure of the language. It helps generating more natural and fluent text. So some of the text in the sequence are masked. Not only the model learns what to predict next, it also have to predict what the masked word can mean. So we see what we did in from the first sentence. If you put a mask on the girl, now the model can say, okay, it can be a girl, it can be a woman, it can be a boy, anyone can read. Like those are all again equally likely. Now, where is the problem coming? It's I've also mentioned the links where you can go and read about it in details. It talks about a very ambiguous example. It says that the Roman Empire masked with the reign of Augustus. It's a very interesting example. So basically, both are historically correct information. It can begin or end. So it began with Caesar Augustus and it ended with Romulus Augustus. Both are Augustus. What would you use? It's a began or ended. So there comes the context. Sometimes it struggles to generalize the task, understand the context. So here comes ChatGPT. It is the first model in production to be trained by human feedback. So I now will introduce what is this reinforcement learning using human feedback, how the human feedback process looks like. So ChatGPT is trained using this reinforcement learning using human feedback. I'll simplify the process very, very much. I'll explain in a very, very simplified way. It contains three broad components. One is the supervised fine-tuning step. So this is a supervised model, and let's just talk about when we go to the next slides. I'll not deep dive into here in this slide. So there are three components. One is the SFT model, one is the reward model, and one is the policy model. Without wasting time, let's just see what is the supervised fine-tuning model. Now, it is very, very difficult to get a huge amount of labeled data. So the first step is a supervised model. So supervised model means you need a labeled data. So how do we even get a labeled data? So inputs are prompts. So basically the questions that we ask ChatGPT, and the output are the answers that ChatGPT gave. Now the first step is a supervised model. So a group of human labelers are requested to given a set of prompts. So why don't you write down the answers? So now it is very very expensive to have a huge labeled model. So this first step is fine tuned using a small amount of data. Now we'll talk about, so let's say here we'll look into the example. The prompt is telling like, okay, explain the moon landing to a 6-year-old, and now the labeler like writes down an answer, and this part uses pre-trained model in the GPT-5 series to train it. But here, as I said, the data used is very, very minimal because it's very, very expensive to get huge amount of labeled data. So how this process is solved. Now coming to step number 2, which is generating a reward model. So in a reward model, here what happens, we use the output from the first model, which is the supervised fine-tuning model, and let the model give different outputs. Now the labelers are said, okay, we have one prompt and the model is asked to give like for each prompt, the model gives around 4 to 9 outputs. And now the labelers are asked, why don't you rank them like in order of context, in order of accuracy, whatever think is correct. So now the labelers rank the output that comes out of the SFT model. So if we look into here, it asks the same question. Can you explain the moon landing to a 6-year-old? And 4 answers are generated. And now the labelers are asked to rank order the responses. And now this data will now be used to train our reward model. And so now what we are getting over here is that we started with a very small amount of data, but with this step, now the data that we get at this step is around 10 times. So the scalability issue of not having a huge amount of labeled data is being solved by step number 2. Now comes step number 3, which is the proximal policy optimization. So what happens over here? Now reinforcement learning is now applied to fine tune the SFT policy by letting it optimize the reward model of step 2. For that, the algo that ChatGPT is using is proximal policy optimization. So, first, it is used to train the agents in the reinforcement learning. It uses an on policy algorithm. So, what is an on policy algorithm? Because it is learning from and updating the current policy directly. So what does this mean? It actually means that the BPO is continuously adopting the current policy based on the actions that the agent is taking and the reward that it is receiving. Now, it not only does that, it also uses a trust region optimization. What do you mean by trust region optimization? It puts a constraint that the change in the policy to be within a certain distance to the previous policy. So this ensures a stability. It's not like you ranked ordered it in such a way and you're completely changing the policy in the next step. So it takes care of that. And now a value function is estimated to, so now a value function is generated. So what is a value function? So the value function is used to estimate the expected return of a given state or an action. It is used to compute the difference between the expected return and the current action. So we are seeing over here, so what happens? So if we sum up what is happening um, in the diagram that you are seeing. Now the PPO model, which is the proximal policy optimization, is initialized from the first step, SFT model, and the value function is coming from the reward model. Now, given the prompt and the response, a penalty is added from the SFT model to mitigate the over optimization of the reward model. So my reward model is saying something, and I'm getting a value from the SFT model, and it is used to optimize and the reward is used to update the policy using the proximal policy optimization. All right, now coming to the evaluation, how the model is evaluating. It is evaluating based on the model's ability to follow the user instruction, that given a user instruction, how well the model is able to generate good results. It is also judged against the model's tendency for hallucination. It's not like it randomly generates text, even though it's very, very fluent. It should be factually correct and related to the question. It should also understand when the question doesn't make sense at all and doesn't just goes on answering whenever it gets any question. And also appropriate context free from bias, like whether there is a bias present, that's a totally different discussion. That's a big discussion. The how to mitigate bias from generative AI, but preliminary steps are taken to make sure that the responses are free from bias and doesn't contain any bad languages. I'm not going into what are the limitations of ChatGPT because I'll be concentrating more on the application in finance and how what are the advantages and the risk over there. But before I go there, let's quickly go over some of the first thing using ChatGPT or generative AI, which are the prompt strategies for better output. So there are like okay, I have put in some links which you can go more of like this link consists of like 100 best ChatGPT prompts. But overall, summing it up, the first thing, when we give a prompt to the ChatGPT, it's very, very important that it understand what the role it is playing. For example, we want let's say we are using chat gpt to make some travel plans for us. So it should know that it's acting as a travel agent. So it is creating a travel plan for someone who is asking that, okay, why don't you make a travel plan from date this and this. So the chat gpt should know exactly what role it's playing. If there is an ambiguity in that, maybe the answers or the responses that are being generated can, I won't say it will be wrong. It won't really serve the purpose of the person who is putting in the prompt, the context. It might diverge from the context it is being used for. The other thing is whenever we are interacting with ChatGPT or asking for a prompt, it would be very, very useful if it understands the audience. For example, when we are making a presentation, so the even the content of the presentation totally differs based on the audience. Let's say a very, very technical audience, the content of the presentation will be very different. If I make the same presentation for senior executive, the content, even for the same topic, the content will be totally different. So same for ChatGPT. If you're using it, and so it should definitely understand what is the audience and also the channel. By what do you mean by channel? By channel means let's say we're trying to use it to make a post on a social media. Now there are like multiple social media. We are using it for Twitter, we're using it for Instagram, or we're using it for LinkedIn. The tone and the length of the content differs so much. So maybe we know that we are using the content, let's say for LinkedIn, and if we do not tell it to ChatGPT, okay, this is my channel, I want to use it for, maybe the content that it's generating, we won't be like very, very satisfied. So two things that should be very clear while giving up the prompt, which is audience and the channel for communication. And the other is the third thing that I also wanted to say. It's more about define the structure. Sometimes it's not just a one-line prompt. Maybe we can just say, okay, we want a very precise output from ChatGPT, and let's say I just say ChatGPT, tell me the maybe if I just say ChatGPT the same thing, what are the applications of ChatGPT in finance? It can give me a very, very long answer. Or if I just say, why don't you give me the applications of ChatGPT in 2 sentences? There I am just structuring it. I'm telling it that, okay, give me a very precise answer in just 2 sentences. It actually helps you cover up what we're using it for. The second and the last one, which is chained prompt. It's more like um, continuing the dialogue. You're asking a question, it's giving you an answer, and you are asking back something which is related to what it has just given. So it's like chain prompts, so you can go on enhancing or updating the responses that you are gaining from ChatGPT. Now, coming to this slide, which is the main one, it's the application of ChatGPT or generative AI in the finance industry. One, which is a very common one, which is the customer service. Customer service, we know we have been talking about chatbots, virtual chatbots from years. This actually helps in enhancing the customer service, including like human dialing interaction, all the clock availability. We already have it. You can use to enhance it more to make a better customer satisfaction. Second is personalized content. So it can be used for creating very personalized and targeted content based on customer behavior and present market trend. So as we know, this present market trend, it changes so fast, and it's not like even the customer behavior is not something which is constant over a very, very long period of time. So given the very latest behavior, or maybe the transaction history, or whatever people are doing in social media, you can create very curated personal content from a marketing standpoint. Third is investment planning. Here of so okay, how it can be used, they can use here now. Financial advisors can analyze so many different scenarios and also uncertainty. It sometimes we have now started analyzing, started doing a lot of research on market uncertainties, but we really don't know when a new market uncertainty comes in, like when COVID-19 came in, and we had zero idea of how it will hit the market. So it's not like we will be 100% accurate in predicting the next market uncertainty, but whenever it is at a very, very nascent stage or the initial stage, it can be used to analyze it and do very good investment planning for that particular point of time. Four is enhanced fraud detection. So financial industry, so the way the fraud changes, so the behavior of fraud attacks changes so rapidly, and the amount of data available for training and to designing a new fraud model is very difficult due to lack of data. So we can use generation of synthetic data to train very good fraud detection model. The fifth one, it can be very thoroughly used for compliance and regulation, where we can automate a huge amount of reporting tasks, and like where reporting is mandate, and like so much of time goes in reporting, and a generative AI can be used to automate them. And also data entry, these are all mundane manual task, which consist of which like takes like so much of time of people, like of analysts. We can use generative AI to automate those. Now, here coming the threats in the finance industry, or enabling the finance industry, how it can be advantageous to finance industry. It can help the companies create a hyper personalized product with the, again, it's not only about customer satisfaction. Whenever we want to launch a new product, assessing the market, assessing the competitors, assessing how the customer behavior and likes and dislikes changing, you can use this to design new products. It, again, internal efficiency, marketing content, report generation that we already talked about, scaling. So it can help to scale your existing data and analytics where it doesn't even exist. It can help you automate all the reporting tasks. But what about the threats? It's not only what we are using in the finance industry. it's not like generative AI won't be used by fraudsters. So here comes the ease. If the fraudsters are using generative AI to create like synthetic merchants, if they are using like a high scale synthetic merchants in a very rapid uh, rapid speed, that actually is a threat for the finance industry. Also, scaling out social engineering operation with believable customer profiles. It might look like true, just like original ones, looking they can just create like so many profiles on social medias, just not creating silos, profiles in silos, creating the networks. Now they can use to create the networks which looks like very original one. But and the most two important things is the bias. So we cannot just directly start using the content that this algorithms are generating for commercial purpose because of two reasons. One is the bias that might be there in the content, and another is a lack of transparency. We speak so much about explainable AI. We have so many algorithms available for explainable AI. It is very easy to mathematically explain them when it comes to classification models, but it becomes very difficult to explain while it comes to content generation and also the bias. So, like, we don't want the content that is being generated um, make the companies fall into any legal complications. We don't want that the content generated bring in copyright risk, or we don't want it to target to any protected group or underrepresented group. So because of these two things, we should be very careful about how we are using generative AI for commercial purposes. Now, some of the advice that we should use, some of the I say like some of the points we should keep in mind while implementing generative AI when we want to implement it. So these are all open source algorithms, and we shouldn't enter any confidential or IP or sensitive data into generative AI, which is open source. Like from a company perspective, we don't want to do that. Again, I know. So we also know that you can use this algorithms to create codes, but at present, without proper regulation, without proper checks, we shouldn't really use it like to totally replace humans while writing the internal softwares, so that there should be like a checkpoints. If something fails, we should be know exactly where things are going wrong. So it becomes pretty risky if we are using this to debug any internal software. Now, I already spoke about content. When we are using content using generative AI for commercial purposes, it should be thoroughly reviewed. It should be thoroughly reviewed so that it doesn't create any copyright issues, or it totally aligns by the data strategy privacy, and also from the legal perspective, everything is taken care of. I think also with the rise and adaptation of generative AI algorithms, now all the financial institutes, or like any company, should now lay down a proper, should have a proper guidance, like a maybe a document or a guidance or a proper framework by which they can assess the content that this algorithms are generating while when we use it for deployment. So this is the end of my presentation, and yes, I would be open to questions.